In the most unforgiving corners of the wilderness, moments of calm can shatter in an instant when predator and hunter cross paths. 1 second the forest is still, the next it erupts with violence, blinds splinter, cabins collapse, and charging animals turn the hunter into the hunted. These are not tall tales or myths, but hard lessons carved into memory by those who faced nature's fury. From Alaska's bear country to the shadowed forests of Europe, we'll uncover 6 encounters that prove how quickly mastery can turn into mayhem. The Chulitna River country in south-central Alaska had been Jack Reid's hunting ground for over 30 years. In September 2019, the remote wilderness stretched endlessly across rugged terrain, where glacial rivers carved through dense stands of alder and spruce, creating perfect corridors for Alaska's massive brown bears during their final feeding frenzy before winter hibernation. The region had earned a reputation among seasoned hunters as both a paradise and a death trap, where trophy-class grizzlies could weigh over 1,000 pounds and stood nearly 10 feet tall on their hind legs. Jack Reid was 54 years old and had built his reputation as one of Alaska's most respected backcountry hunters. His weathered face bore the marks of countless seasons in the wilderness, and his steady hands had never failed him during critical moments. Fellow hunters spoke of Jack with a mixture of admiration and concern, knowing his preference for solo hunts in areas where most men feared to tread, even in groups. His hunting partner, Dale Kinross, had accompanied Jack on this particular expedition reluctantly, having argued unsuccessfully for bringing additional backup. The salmon run had been exceptional that year, drawing enormous bears from miles around to the creek beds where the silverfish spawned in overwhelming numbers. Jack and Dale had been tracking one particular bear for 3 days, following massive paw prints that measured nearly 14 inches long. The animal they pursued was a legendary bear that local guides whispered about around campfires, a creature so large that its tracks dwarfed those of typical mature males. On the morning of September 15th, the two hunters positioned themselves along a creek where fresh bear sign indicated recent feeding activity. The plan was straightforward. Dale would remain in an elevated position with clear sight lines while Jack moved through the dense alder thickets to position himself for an intercept shot. Both men carried high-powered rifles suitable for dangerous game, and both had decades of combined experience in bear country. Jack disappeared into the thick vegetation around 10:30 that morning, moving with the silent precision that had kept him alive through countless encounters with Alaska's deadliest predators. The alder bushes grew so densely that Dale lost sight of his partner within minutes, relying on predetermined hand signals and the occasional glimpse of Jack's orange hunting cap to track his progress. 20 minutes passed before Dale heard the unmistakable sound of a massive animal moving through the undergrowth. The noise was different from anything he had experienced before, suggesting an animal of extraordinary size pushing through vegetation that would stop smaller bears entirely. Dale raised his binoculars and scanned the creek bed, searching for movement among the shadows. The first rifle shot echoed across the valley at exactly 10:52, followed immediately by a second shot that seemed to come from a different location. Dale's blood turned cold as he realized the shots had come from different positions, suggesting Jack had been forced to move quickly between his first and second attempts. The silence that followed lasted only seconds before a roar unlike anything Dale had ever heard shattered the morning quiet. Dale scrambled down from his position, crashing through the alder bushes toward the sound of the gunshots. His heart pounded as he fought through the dense vegetation, knowing that something had gone terribly wrong. The roaring continued, mixed now with the sound of splintering wood and thrashing vegetation that suggested a massive struggle taking place just ahead. When Dale finally broke through the last line of alders, he found himself in a small clearing where the unthinkable was unfolding before his eyes. Jack was retreating uphill, his rifle pressed against his shoulder, blood streaming down his left arm and soaking through his hunting jacket. Below him, the largest brown bear Dale had ever seen was charging uphill with unstoppable momentum. The bear showed clear signs of mortal wounds, with dark blood matting its fur along the shoulder and chest where Jack's bullets had found their mark. Despite these injuries that would have dropped most animals instantly, the enormous bear continued its charge with the terrifying determination that had made Alaska brown bears legendary among dangerous game hunters. Jack's face showed no panic despite his obvious injuries and the approaching death that thundered toward him on 4 massive paws. His rifle remained steady, and Dale watched in awe as his partner maintained perfect shooting form even while retreating uphill over treacherous ground. The bear's eyes burned with primitive fury, and foam flecked its massive jaws as it closed the final yards between hunter and prey. At 15 yards, Jack fired his third and final shot. The bullet struck the bear's center mass, finally breaking the animal's forward momentum and sending it crashing to the ground in a heap of fur and muscle just meters from where Jack stood. The silence that followed was deafening after the chaos of the charge. Dale reached Jack's side as his partner slowly lowered his rifle. Despite his wounds, Jack remained conscious and alert, though clearly in severe shock from blood loss and trauma. The bear's final swipe had caught Jack across the ribs, leaving deep gashes that would require immediate medical attention. As the fading Alaskan light began to settle over the remote clearing, Dale stayed by Jack's side, applying pressure to his wounds while waiting for the helicopter evacuation they had radioed for. The massive brown bear lay motionless nearby, a testament to both the deadly power of Alaska's wilderness and the extraordinary courage required to hunt in such unforgiving country. Jack Reid survived his encounter with the legendary bear, though he never returned to solo hunting in the Chulitna River country. The experience had reminded him that even the most experienced hunters remained vulnerable to the unpredictable fury of Alaska's greatest predators. The remote valleys of northern Alberta had witnessed countless elk hunts over the decades, but October 2024 brought conditions that seasoned hunters described as perfect storm weather for rutting bulls. The region stretched across hundreds of square miles of pristine wilderness, where ancient migration routes guided massive elk herds through corridors carved by centuries of animal movement. Local outfitters warned that this particular season had produced unusually aggressive bull behavior, with reports of territorial disputes lasting hours and property damage at hunting camps becoming commonplace. Ethan McAllister had planned this hunt for 3 years, studying topographical maps and weather patterns to identify the perfect location for his ground-blind strategy. At 38 years old, Ethan possessed the patience and technical knowledge that separated successful elk hunters from weekend warriors. His blind construction utilized military-grade camouflage netting, scent-blocking materials, and reinforced aluminum poles designed to withstand severe weather conditions. The valley Ethan selected showed abundant signs of rutting activity, with scarred trees, wallowed mud, and fresh tracks indicating that multiple bulls were competing for territory in the immediate area. His scouting had revealed a natural funnel where elk moved between feeding and bedding areas, creating the ideal ambush location for a patient hunter willing to wait days for the perfect shot opportunity. Ethan spent 2 days constructing his blind, carefully positioning the structure to take advantage of prevailing wind patterns while maintaining clear shooting lanes in multiple directions. The blind measured 8 feet long and 6 feet wide, with shooting ports cut at precise angles to accommodate different approach routes. He tested the structural integrity by applying pressure from various angles, confident that his construction could withstand the weight of a large animal brushing against it. On October 20th, Ethan settled into his blind before dawn, wearing multiple layers of scent-blocking clothing and carrying his trusted Winchester Model 70 chambered in .30.06 Springfield. His ammunition consisted of premium hunting bullets designed specifically for large game, and his rifle scope had been zeroed at exactly 100 yards during extensive range sessions before the trip. The morning progressed slowly, with only distant bugling suggesting elk activity in the surrounding timber. Ethan remained motionless for hours, using subtle cow calls and antler rattling to simulate the sounds of a receptive female and competing bulls. His strategy required perfect timing and restraint, as overcalling could alert wary bulls to the presence of human hunters. At approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, Ethan heard heavy footsteps approaching through the timber beyond his shooting lanes. The sound indicated an animal of substantial size, moving with the deliberate pace of a dominant bull patrolling his territory. Ethan slowly raised his rifle, controlling his breathing as he prepared for what could be a once-in-a-lifetime shot opportunity. The massive bull that emerged from the tree line exceeded every expectation Ethan had harbored about Alberta elk hunting. The animal stood nearly 5 feet at the shoulder and displayed a rack that would easily score over 400 inches, making it a trophy-class specimen by any measurement standard. The bull's behavior immediately struck Ethan as unusual, with ears constantly twitching and head movements suggesting extreme agitation beyond normal rutting behavior. Ethan aligned his crosshairs on the bull's chest, preparing to squeeze the trigger when the animal suddenly changed direction and began moving directly toward his concealed position. The bull's nostrils flared repeatedly, and its body language shifted from casual patrol to aggressive investigation. Ethan realized with growing alarm that despite his scent-blocking precautions, something had alerted the bull to the presence of an intruder. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed that left Ethan no time to escape or reposition. The 1,200-pound bull lowered its massive head and charged directly at the blind with the unstoppable momentum of a freight train. The animal's antlers struck the camouflage netting first, followed immediately by its chest slamming into the aluminum support structure. The blind collapsed instantly under the tremendous impact, with support poles snapping like twigs and the entire structure folding inward on Ethan's position. His left arm became trapped between a bent pole and the blind's floor, while the bull's continued thrashing drove additional debris into his ribs. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, making it difficult for Ethan to maintain consciousness as the enraged bull continued its attack on the collapsed blind. Through sheer desperation, Ethan managed to work his rifle barrel through an opening in the wreckage and fire a single shot at point-blank range. The bullet struck the bull in the shoulder, finally breaking its aggressive behavior and causing the animal to stagger away from the destruction with blood streaming from its wound. Ethan spent the next hour crawling from the ruins of his blind, assessing injuries that included a clearly broken left arm and ribs that sent sharp pain through his chest with every breath. The experience had taught him that even the most carefully planned hunts could turn deadly when rutting bulls mistook hunting blinds for territorial competitors. Kodiak Island represented the pinnacle of brown bear hunting in North America, where September 2025 found guide Tom Halverson leading his client Ryan through some of the most dangerous terrain on the continent. The island's unique ecosystem supported the largest brown bears in the world, with mature bears often exceeding 1,500 pounds and standing over 10 feet tall when rearing on their hind legs. The glacial rivers that carved through the island's interior created perfect salmon spawning grounds, concentrating massive bears in relatively small areas during their pre-hibernation feeding frenzy. Tom Halverson had guided hunters through Kodiak's wilderness for 18 years, earning a reputation for keeping clients safe while providing opportunities at trophy-class bears. His knowledge of bear behavior patterns and intimate familiarity with the island's geography made him one of the most sought-after guides in Alaska. Ryan, his current client, had booked the hunt 2 years in advance and traveled from the lower 48 specifically for a chance at a Kodiak giant. The morning of September 23rd began with perfect hunting conditions, featuring overcast skies, minimal wind, and temperatures hovering just above freezing. Tom and Ryan positioned themselves along a glacial river where salmon runs had attracted several large bears over the previous week. Fresh tracks in the muddy riverbank indicated that at least 3 different bears were actively feeding in the immediate area. Ryan carried a Ruger Model 77 chambered in .375 Holland and Holland Magnum, loaded with premium hunting ammunition designed specifically for dangerous game applications. Tom insisted that all his clients use rifles of sufficient power to stop charging bears, having witnessed too many close calls involving hunters armed with inadequate cartridges. The .375 H&H represented the minimum caliber Tom would allow on his hunts. They constructed a low brush blind approximately 50 yards from the river's edge, carefully positioning the structure to take advantage of prevailing wind patterns while maintaining clear shooting lanes across the water. The blind's location provided excellent visibility of the far bank, where bears typically emerged from the timber to access salmon-rich pools below a series of small rapids. At approximately 10:15, a massive bear emerged from the alders on the opposite bank, immediately capturing Ryan's attention through his binoculars. The bear displayed the characteristic dished face and muscular hump that identified it as a mature male, with a coat of rich brown fur that gleamed silver in the filtered sunlight. Tom estimated the animal's weight at over 1,200 pounds, making it a trophy-class specimen by any standard. Ryan settled into shooting position, adjusting his rifle rest while Tom provided whispered guidance about shot placement and timing. The bear moved methodically along the far bank, occasionally entering shallow water to investigate salmon that had died after spawning. Its behavior appeared completely normal for a feeding bear during peak salmon season. The situation changed dramatically when the massive bear suddenly entered the river and began moving directly toward their position. Tom had never witnessed such behavior during his years of guiding, as Kodiak bears typically avoided crossing rivers during daylight hours unless pursuing specific food sources or fleeing immediate danger. The water reached the bear's chest as it pushed steadily forward, demonstrating the incredible swimming ability that made these animals so dangerous. Ryan aligned his crosshairs on the bear's shoulder as Tom whispered urgent instructions about shot placement on a swimming target. At 30 yards, Ryan squeezed the trigger, sending a 270-grain bullet toward the approaching bear. The shot struck the animal in the shoulder region, causing it to stumble and emit a roar that echoed across the water. Rather than retreating or collapsing from the wound, the bear continued its advance with increased aggression. Its massive paw struck the blind's frame just as Ryan attempted to chamber a second round, crushing the lightweight structure and pinning Ryan against the collapsed supports. The bear's weight pressed down on Ryan's chest while its claws raked across his arm, leaving deep lacerations that immediately began bleeding profusely. Tom fired his backup rifle from point-blank range, placing a killing shot behind the bear's shoulder that finally ended its aggressive behavior. The massive animal collapsed partially on top of Ryan, requiring both men to work together to shift its weight and extract Ryan from beneath the carcass. The aftermath revealed that Ryan had sustained 3 broken ribs, multiple deep lacerations along his right arm, and severe bruising across his chest and back. Tom applied first aid while radioing for helicopter evacuation, knowing that Ryan required immediate medical attention to prevent infection and treat his internal injuries. The experience reinforced Tom's belief that Kodiak bears near salmon streams could exhibit completely unpredictable behavior patterns that defied conventional hunting wisdom. Even with proper concealment, adequate firepower, and decades of guiding experience, the island's massive bears remained capable of surprising even the most prepared hunters with sudden, aggressive behavior that provided little warning or opportunity for escape. The remote valleys of northwestern Montana had earned a reputation among elk hunters as some of the most productive hunting grounds in North America, where late September 2025 brought ideal conditions for the annual elk rut. Jake Thompson had chosen this particular location for his 16-year-old son Liam's first serious rifle hunt, believing the area offered the perfect combination of abundant game and manageable terrain for an inexperienced hunter to learn proper techniques. Jake Thompson possessed 32 years of elk hunting experience, having started as a teenager himself in these same mountains during the 1990s. His knowledge of elk behavior patterns and intimate familiarity with the region's topography made him an ideal mentor for young hunters seeking to learn the fundamentals of ethical hunting practices. Liam had accompanied his father on several previous hunts as an observer, but this would mark his first opportunity to carry a rifle and attempt to harvest his own elk. The valley they selected showed abundant signs of rutting activity, with scarred trees, muddy wallows, and fresh tracks indicating that multiple bulls were actively competing for breeding rights in the immediate area. The bugling that echoed through the timber each morning and evening suggested that at least 4 mature bulls had established territories within a 2-mile radius of their camp. Jake spent considerable time teaching Liam about scent control, explaining how elk possessed senses far superior to those of white-tailed deer, and required hunters to take extraordinary precautions to avoid detection. They used scent-eliminating soap, stored their hunting clothes in sealed containers with pine needles, and planned their approach routes to take advantage of prevailing wind patterns. On September 28th, father and son positioned themselves along a ridge where multiple game trails converged near a series of natural springs that attracted elk throughout the daylight hours. Jake carried his trusted Remington Model 700 chambered in .30, 06 Springfield, while Liam shouldered a lighter Winchester Model 70 and .270 Winchester that Jake had specifically chosen for its manageable recoil and proven effectiveness on elk-sized game. The morning progressed with steady bugling from multiple directions, indicating that the rut was reaching its peak intensity. Jake taught Liam to distinguish between different types of elk vocalizations, explaining how challenge bugles differed from location calls and how cows communicated with their calves. This education continued for several hours as they waited for elk to move within shooting range. At approximately 11:30, Jake heard heavy footsteps approaching through the timber below their position. He signaled Liam to remain motionless while raising his binoculars to scan the forest for movement. The sound suggested an animal of considerable size moving with the deliberate pace of a mature bull patrolling his territory during peak rutting season. The massive 6-point bull that emerged from the timber exceeded every expectation Jake had harbored for Liam's first elk hunt. The animal displayed a symmetrical rack that would easily score over 350 inches, making it a trophy-class specimen by any measurement standard. Jake whispered instructions to Liam about shot placement while the young hunter raised his rifle with trembling hands. Liam aligned his crosshairs on the bull's chest area, following his father's guidance about aiming for the heart-lung region that would provide the quickest and most humane kill. The bull stood broadside at 40 yards, presenting the perfect shot opportunity that many hunters wait years to encounter. Jake placed his hand on Liam's shoulder, providing reassurance while the teenager prepared to take his first shot at big game. The situation changed instantly when the bull's head snapped toward their position, indicating that something had alerted the animal to the presence of human hunters. Jake realized with growing alarm that their cow calling had triggered an aggressive response rather than the curious approach they had anticipated. The bull's body language shifted from casual feeding behavior to the aggressive posture that preceded a territorial challenge. What followed happened with terrifying speed that left neither hunter time to escape or reposition. The massive bull lowered its antlered head and charged directly up the steep slope toward their position, covering the 40 yards of separation in seconds. Jake threw himself in front of Liam just as the bull's antlers struck a large spruce tree, sending both hunters tumbling down the hillside. The impact knocked Liam unconscious momentarily while Jake absorbed the brunt of the collision against his ribs and back. The bull's momentum carried it past their position, but its thrashing antlers caught Jake across the chest, leaving deep scratches and what felt like cracked ribs. Liam regained consciousness to find his father bleeding and struggling to maintain his footing on the steep slope. Jake managed to raise his rifle despite his injuries, placing a precise shot behind the bull's shoulder that finally ended its aggressive behavior. The massive animal collapsed within sight of their original position, its enormous rack now silent after the chaos of its final charge. Jake remained conscious throughout the ordeal, though clearly shaken by the violence of the encounter. The experience left both hunters with a profound respect for the unpredictable nature of elk during rutting season, when mature bulls could interpret human presence as territorial competition, requiring immediate aggressive response. Liam sustained only minor scrapes and bruising, while Jake required medical attention for his cracked ribs and deep lacerations. Despite the trauma of their close call, both father and son agreed that the hunt had provided invaluable lessons about the importance of constant vigilance and quick thinking when pursuing dangerous game in their natural habitat. The Alaska Range had witnessed countless encounters between hunters and grizzly bears over the decades, but November 2024 brought unusually aggressive bear behavior as animals prepared for winter hibernation. Mark Dawson had spent the previous week pursuing late-season caribou through some of the most remote terrain in North America, where his small log cabin represented the only human structure within a 50-mile radius. The region's isolation made it perfect for serious hunters seeking trophy-class caribou, but also created conditions where dangerous wildlife encounters became inevitable. Mark Dawson possessed 15 years of Alaska hunting experience, having moved to the territory from the lower 48 specifically to pursue the continent's most challenging big game species. His cabin measured only 12 feet by 16 feet, but provided essential shelter during extended hunting trips when weather conditions made tent camping impossible. The structure's thick log walls and heavy wooden door had withstood severe storms and curious wildlife for over a decade. The week's hunting had proven exceptionally successful, with Mark harvesting 2 mature caribou bulls whose meat now hung in carefully constructed caches around the cabin. The scent of fresh venison permeated the immediate area despite his efforts to store the meat at safe distances from his sleeping quarters. Local guides had warned him that late-season bears could detect food sources from miles away and would investigate any promising scent trails. Mark's cabin location offered strategic advantages for caribou hunting, positioned along an ancient migration route where thousands of animals passed each autumn during their movement to winter feeding grounds. However, the same location attracted predators and scavengers seeking easy meals before winter forced them into hibernation. Grizzly bears represented the most serious threat, with mature bears weighing over 800 pounds and possessing the strength to demolish wooden structures. On November 15th, Mark settled into his sleeping bag around midnight after spending the day processing caribou meat and preparing for another hunt the following morning. His .338 Winchester Magnum rifle hung on wooden pegs above his bunk, loaded and ready for immediate use in case of emergency. Years of Alaska hunting had taught him never to sleep unarmed in grizzly country, regardless of how secure his shelter appeared. The first indication of trouble came at approximately 3:15 in the morning, when a series of loud cracks against the cabin's exterior walls jolted Mark from deep sleep. The sound suggested something large investigating the structure's perimeter, possibly attracted by meat scents or simply curious about the human habitation. Mark remained motionless in his sleeping bag, hoping the animal would lose interest and move away without attempting to enter. The scratching and sniffing sounds continued for several minutes before escalating into deliberate attempts to breach the cabin's defenses. Mark heard claws raking against the log walls and heavy breathing near the door, indicating that a large bear had decided to investigate the interior of his shelter. The animal's behavior suggested determination rather than casual curiosity, making Mark realize that escape or peaceful resolution was unlikely. What happened next unfolded with the explosive violence that made grizzly bears legendary among Alaska's most dangerous predators. The cabin door splintered under the first massive blow, sending wooden fragments across the floor while the bear's enormous bulk filled the doorway. Mark dove behind his bunk just as the animal's massive head and shoulders pushed through the opening. The bear's size exceeded anything Mark had encountered during his years in Alaska, with a head that appeared nearly 2 feet wide and shoulders that barely fit through the doorway. Its eyes reflected the dim light from Mark's emergency lantern, creating an image that would haunt his memories for years afterward. The animal's breathing created clouds of vapor in the cold air while it surveyed the cabin's interior. Mark's leg became trapped between his bunk and the cabin wall as the bear swept across the small interior, scattering his gear and destroying his carefully organized supplies. The animal's claws raked across his thigh, tearing through heavy winter clothing and drawing blood from deep scratches that immediately began staining his thermal underwear. The pain was immediate and intense, making it difficult to maintain his grip on the rifle. Through sheer desperation and years of hunting experience, Mark managed to aim his .338 Winchester Magnum at the bear's massive shoulder and fire a single shot at point-blank range. The bullet's impact sent the animal staggering backward through the doorway, roaring with pain and anger while blood streamed from its wound. The recoil nearly knocked the rifle from Mark's hands, but the shot had achieved its intended effect of driving the bear away from his position. The grizzly retreated into the darkness outside, leaving Mark bleeding and shaken inside his destroyed cabin. Half of his stored meat had been scattered or ruined, his door hung in splinters, and deep claw marks scarred the interior walls. By dawn, Mark had managed to stop the bleeding from his leg wounds and assess the extent of damage to his shelter and supplies. The experience reinforced his understanding that in grizzly country, no structure provided guaranteed safety from determined bears seeking food sources or simply investigating human presence in their territory. The Masuria forests of northeastern Poland had hosted traditional driven hunts for centuries, where December 2018 brought ideal conditions for pursuing the region's massive wild boar population. These ancient woodlands stretched across thousands of acres of pristine wilderness, where oak and beech trees created dense canopies that provided perfect habitat for some of Europe's largest wild boars. The region's isolation from major population centers allowed boar populations to flourish, producing keelers that could exceed 250 kilograms and display tusks capable of inflicting devastating injuries. The weather conditions on that particular December morning presented both advantages and challenges for the hunting party. A light snowfall had begun during the early hours, providing excellent tracking conditions while also muffling the sounds of approaching hunters and beaters. The temperature hovered just below freezing, creating the crisp air that experienced hunters knew would carry scent for miles and potentially alert wary boars to human presence long before visual contact occurred. Local forestry records indicated that the specific section of woodland they planned to hunt had not been disturbed by commercial logging operations for over 15 years, allowing the natural ecosystem to develop the thick understory vegetation that wild boars preferred for daytime bedding areas. The combination of mature mast-producing trees and abundant water sources had created what wildlife biologists described as a perfect wild boar habitat, supporting population densities that exceeded those found in most European hunting preserves. Piotr Nowak had participated in Polish-driven hunts for over 20 years, earning recognition among local hunting clubs for his skill with traditional European hunting rifles and his knowledge of wild boar behavior patterns. At 43 years old, Piotr possessed the experience and patience that separated successful boar hunters from weekend enthusiasts who underestimated these dangerous animals. His reputation among fellow hunters was built on clean kills and adherence to the strict safety protocols that govern driven hunts. The previous evening's preparation had been meticulous, with Piotr spending hours cleaning and inspecting his equipment while reviewing topographical maps that showed the terrain they would hunt the following day. His hunting jacket bore the scars of previous encounters with wounded boars, including repairs where tusks had slashed through the heavy canvas during close-quarters encounters that had tested his nerve and marksmanship under extreme pressure. Piotr's knowledge of wild boar psychology had been accumulated through decades of studying these intelligent animals, observing how they reacted to different hunting pressures and learning to predict their behavior patterns during various seasonal conditions. He understood that winter hunts presented unique challenges, as cold weather made boars more aggressive and unpredictable, while their thick winter coats provided additional protection against poorly placed shots that might only wound rather than kill cleanly. The hunting party assembled on December 8th included 12 experienced hunters positioned at strategic intervals along known boar travel routes, while a team of professional beaters worked systematically through the dense timber to drive animals toward the waiting guns. This traditional hunting method had been practiced in Polish forests for generations, requiring precise coordination and absolute adherence to safety rules to prevent accidents among participants. The huntmaster had briefed all participants during the pre-dawn meeting, emphasizing the particular dangers associated with hunting during rutting season when mature boars displayed heightened aggression and unpredictable behavior patterns. Radio communication protocols were established to ensure constant contact between hunters and beaters, while emergency medical procedures were reviewed in detail, given the remote location and potential for serious injuries. Each hunter's position had been selected based on years of experience with boar movement patterns through the forest, taking into account prevailing wind directions, natural funnels created by topography, and historical data about where wounded animals typically attempted to escape. The spacing between hunters was calculated to provide overlapping fields of fire, while maintaining safe distances that would prevent accidental shootings during the chaos that often accompanied driven hunts. Piotr carried his grandfather's Mauser rifle chambered in 8x57 mm Mauser, loaded with heavy hunting bullets designed specifically for dangerous European game. The rifle had accounted for dozens of wild boar over the decades, and Piotr maintained it in perfect mechanical condition despite its advanced age. His shooting position commanded excellent visibility across a natural clearing where boars typically emerged when pressured by the approaching beaters. At approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, the distinctive sound of a large boar crashing through the undergrowth announced the approach of Piotr's first opportunity of the day. The animal that emerged from the timber exceeded his expectations for size and aggression, displaying the scarred hide and massive tusks that identified it as a dominant keeler in its prime. The boar's behavior immediately struck Piotr as unusual, with constant head movements and aggressive posturing suggesting extreme agitation beyond normal stress levels. Pyotr aligned his rifle sights on the boar's shoulder region, preparing to deliver the precise shot placement that would ensure a quick and humane kill. However, his concentration was disrupted by the sounds of other hunters firing at different targets, causing him to rush his shot and strike the massive boar too far back in the abdomen rather than through the vital chest area. The wounded boar's reaction was immediate and terrifying, transforming from a fleeing animal into an enraged predator seeking revenge against the source of its pain. Rather than continuing its escape route, the Kyler turned directly toward Pyotr's position and charged with the unstoppable momentum of a freight train. Its massive tusks gleamed white in the winter sunlight as it covered the distance between them in seconds. What followed represented every boar hunter's worst nightmare scenario, as the wounded animal struck Pyotr low in the legs with devastating force that immediately brought him to the ground. The Keeler's razor-sharp tusks slashed through his heavy winter boots and deep into his calf muscle, severing tendons and causing immediate loss of mobility. Blood began streaming from the wounds, staining the snow bright red around Pyotr's position. As Pyotr fell backward, the enraged boar circled for a second attack, displaying the tactical intelligence that made wounded wild boars so dangerous to hunters throughout Europe. Its second charge targeted his thigh, where its tusks opened deep gashes that would require extensive surgical repair. The animal's weight pressed down on Pyotr's legs while its tusks continued inflicting damage. Desperation and survival instinct took control as Pyotr managed to work his rifle barrel against the boar's chest and fire a point-blank shot that finally ended the animal's aggressive behavior. The bullet's impact at such close range proved instantly fatal, but the recoil also knocked both hunter and prey flat against the snow-covered ground. The massive Keeler died within seconds, but not before inflicting injuries that would permanently affect Pyotr's mobility. Pyotr lay bleeding in the December snow for over 2 hours before fellow hunters and beaters located his position and provided emergency first aid. The temperature had dropped below freezing, adding hypothermia to his list of medical concerns as rescue personnel worked to stabilize his condition and arrange helicopter evacuation to the nearest hospital facility. The experience left Pyotr with permanent nerve damage in his left leg and a pronounced limp that served as a daily reminder of his encounter with one of Europe's most dangerous game animals. Local hunters still referenced his experience when discussing the importance of precise shot placement and the deadly consequences of wounding wild boars during driven hunts. Recovery from his injuries required multiple surgical procedures to repair the severed tendons and damaged muscle tissue in his leg, followed by months of physical therapy that helped him regain partial mobility but could not restore full function. The psychological impact of the attack proved equally challenging as Pyotr struggled with recurring nightmares and anxiety attacks that made it difficult for him to return to hunting activities that had previously defined much of his identity. The hunting community rallied around Pyotr during his recovery, with fellow hunters organizing fundraising events to help cover medical expenses and provide financial support during his extended period of disability. His experience became a cautionary tale shared throughout Polish hunting circles, emphasizing how even the most experienced hunters remained vulnerable to the unpredictable fury of wounded wild boars. Medical professionals who treated Pyotr noted that his injuries were consistent with those typically seen in wild boar attacks throughout Europe, where the animal's tusks created distinctive wound patterns that required specialized surgical techniques to repair properly. The infection risk associated with wild boar wounds was particularly high due to bacteria present in the animal's mouths, requiring aggressive antibiotic treatment to prevent life-threatening complications. European hunting traditions emphasized that wounded wild boars represented the most dangerous animals in the forest, not because of their size or strength, but because they possessed the intelligence and determination to actively hunt their human attackers rather than simply fleeing to safety. The massive Kyler's carcass weighed an estimated 260 kilograms when finally retrieved by the hunting party, its impressive tusks measuring over 15 centimeters in length. Despite the trauma of his encounter, Pyotr insisted that the animal's meat be properly processed and distributed among the hunting party members according to traditional Polish customs.